Picture this. You wake up, and the first thing you smell is fresh coffee brewed by a neighbor who knocked on your door just because she wanted company. You sit on a small terrace. The sun is already warm even though it is barely 8 in the morning, and somewhere down the street a market vendor is calling out prices in a language you are only just beginning to understand. You have no meetings, no commute, and your entire monthly budget, rent, food, dinners out, little adventures, comes to less than what you used to spend on a single week of ordinary life back home. This is not a fantasy. This is what retirement actually looks like for thousands of people who made one brave, slightly unconventional decision. They packed their lives into 2 suitcases and moved somewhere unexpected. Hi, I am Julia, and I have spent the better part of the last decade traveling the world specifically to understand not just where you can live cheaply, but where you can actually live well, where you can meet people, fall in love with a place, build a community, and feel genuinely alive, not just financially comfortable. Because here is the thing nobody tells you when they write those listicles about cheap countries to retire in. The price of your apartment means almost nothing if you spend every evening alone in it. Today, we are going to talk about 10 countries that get both things right. Affordable? Yes. But more than that, places where being single, being older, and being a little bit of a stranger actually works in your favor. Let us go. Country 1, Portugal. Let us start in Europe, because a lot of people assume Europe is automatically off the table when you are watching your budget. And for most of Europe, that is true. But Portugal is that gorgeous exception that refuses to follow the rules. I first spent serious time in Portugal about 6 years ago, and I remember being genuinely confused by how lovely everything was compared to how little I was spending. I was living in a small apartment in Porto, eating extraordinarily well, walking through neighborhoods that looked like film sets, and paying roughly what I would have paid for a studio in a mid-sized American city, but getting so much more in return. Cities like Braga and Coimbra, not just Lisbon and Porto, which have become expensive by Portuguese standards, offer everything you need for a rich social life at a fraction of the price. There are expat communities that organize walks, dinners, language exchanges, day trips. There are local clubs, cultural associations, evening concerts in public squares that are completely free. And then there are the cafes, those legendary Portuguese cafes where a coffee costs almost nothing, and where you can sit for an hour and a half and the owner will stop and chat with you like you are old friends. Practically speaking, a single person can live very comfortably in a smaller Portuguese city on somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400 euros per month. That includes a decent 1-bedroom apartment, groceries, eating out 2 or 3 times a week, transportation, and whatever small indulgences bring you joy. The healthcare system is solid, English is widely spoken, especially among younger people, and the bureaucracy, while sometimes slow, is navigable. Portugal is not the cheapest country on this list, but it might be the easiest entry point into international retirement for someone who wants the comfort of European infrastructure, the safety of the European Union, the beauty of Atlantic coastlines and medieval towns, and a genuine social life waiting to be built. Country 2, Georgia, the country. Now let us make a big leap, geographically and culturally, because the second country on our list is one that stops people in their tracks when I mention it. Not the American state, the country, Georgia, nestled between the Caucasus Mountains, the Black Sea, Russia, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. A country so old it sometimes feels like it exists slightly outside of time. I have been to Georgia 3 times now, and every single time I leave, feeling like I left a piece of myself behind. There is something about this place that gets into your bones. Here is why Georgia belongs on a list for single retirees specifically. The country has one of the most generous visa policies in the world. Citizens of most Western countries can simply arrive and stay for up to a year without any visa at all. 1 year. You can come, set up your life, try it, see if you love it, and if you do, leaving and re-entering resets the clock. This makes Georgia uniquely low commitment and low bureaucratic friction as a retirement destination. The cost of living is almost embarrassingly low by Western standards. A fully furnished 1-bedroom apartment in Tbilisi, the capital, can cost between $250 and $400 per month. A 3-course dinner at a good restaurant might cost you $8 or $10. A bottle of excellent local wine, and Georgian wine is among the oldest and most fascinating in the world, costs maybe $3 at the market. A single person can live an absolutely full and joyful life in Georgia on $600 to $800 per month. Some people do it on even less. But here is what truly sets Georgia apart for someone who is single and worried about loneliness. The Georgian concept of hospitality, which they call tamada culture around the feast table, or simply gastronomy culture, is unlike anything in the Western world. Georgians do not just welcome guests, they consider it almost a sacred duty. Strangers are invited to sit down for meals. Neighbors appear with homemade wine and cheese. If you go to a traditional supra, which is a Georgian feast, you will find yourself surrounded by toasts, stories, laughter, and warmth, even if you just arrived in the country a week ago. The expat community in Tbilisi has grown enormously in recent years, particularly following geopolitical events in 2022 when many Russians moved there, which brought complexity but also a fascinating multicultural energy. There are now regular expat meetups, hiking groups, language classes, and social events throughout the week. You can learn Georgian, which is one of the world's most unique and ancient languages, and a genuine source of pride and delight for locals when foreigners attempt it. Tbilisi itself is a stunningly beautiful city. Ancient churches and Soviet-era architecture and ultra-modern bridges, all in the same skyline. Sulfur baths that have been operating for centuries, an art scene that punches far above its weight, and a nightlife that is internationally renowned if that is your thing. But you can also move to smaller cities like Kutaisi or Batumi on the Black Sea coast and live even more affordably with a completely different energy. The healthcare system is improving, but still limited. Many expats get international health insurance, which remains relatively affordable given the low local cost of living. The winters in Tbilisi are cold and sometimes damp, but for the spring, summer, and autumn, Georgia is one of the most extraordinary places on the planet to simply be alive. Country 3, Vietnam, from the Caucasus to Southeast Asia, and a country that has been quietly seducing travelers and retirees for decades without ever losing its magic. Vietnam is long and narrow and extraordinarily diverse, a country where the North and the South feel like different countries, where the Central Coast has its own personality entirely, and where every city offers a different experience of what life can be. That variety is actually one of its great gifts to the solo retiree, because it means you can try multiple versions of life there before committing to a place. I have spent cumulative months in Vietnam across different visits, and the thing that always strikes me most is how alive the streets feel. Vietnamese urban life happens outside, on plastic stools in front of tiny restaurants, in parks at dawn where groups gather to do Tai Chi or play badminton, in coffee shops that seem to serve as community living rooms. If you live in Vietnam, you cannot be a hermit even if you try. The city invites you in. For single retirees, Da Nang on the Central Coast has become something of a quiet favorite. It has a beautiful beach, a manageable size, excellent international hospitals, a growing expat community, and prices that remain genuinely low. A comfortable one-bedroom apartment near the beach can be found for around $300 to $450 per month. Eating out daily at local restaurants, and Vietnamese food is one of the great cuisines of the world, endlessly varied and endlessly delicious, might cost you less than $200 a month if you eat mostly local. Hoi An, just south of Da Nang, is smaller and more charming. A UNESCO heritage town of lantern-lit streets and tailors and ancient merchant houses, and beloved by retirees who want a slower pace and a strong sense of community. The expat community in Hoi An is tight-knit in the best way. People look out for each other. There are yoga classes, book clubs, cooking classes, volunteer opportunities, community dinners. It is one of those places where being a foreigner of a certain age is actually a social advantage because people are curious about you. Ho Chi Minh City in the south, which many people still call Saigon, is for those who want energy and urban electricity at low prices. Hanoi in the north is more formal, more historically layered, cooler in climate, with a different rhythm, Some people find it more romantic, more literary. Vietnam does not have a retirement visa in the traditional sense, which means retirees typically cycle on tourist visas or use e-visa extensions and do regular border runs. The government has been discussing more formal long-term visa options, so the situation may evolve. It is a practical consideration rather than a deal breaker for most people. A comfortable single-person life in Vietnam can be had for $700 to $1,100 per month, depending on lifestyle and location, including a nice apartment, excellent food, transportation, activities, and even some travel within the region. The climate ranges from tropical in the south to more temperate in the north, and the country's natural beauty, those karst mountains, those rice terraces, that endless coastline, never becomes ordinary. Country 4, Mexico. We stay on the affordable end of the spectrum but cross back to the Western Hemisphere, because no list like this would be honest without talking about Mexico. Specifically, the parts of Mexico that have become beloved retirement destinations not just for their price, but for their spirit. Let me be honest with you about Mexico the way I try to be honest about every place on this list. There are parts of Mexico that have real safety challenges, and anyone moving there needs to research their specific destination carefully rather than thinking of Mexico as a monolith. But there are also parts of Mexico that are among the most beautiful, vibrant, culturally rich, and genuinely safe places you can imagine retiring to. And those places deserve to be discussed on their own terms. Lake Chapala and the nearby town of Ajijic in Jalisco State is probably the most famous retirement destination in Mexico, and with good reason. Sitting at an altitude of about 1,500 meters, the climate is what the locals call eternal spring. Mild year-round, almost never too hot, almost never cold. The light is extraordinary, the lake is beautiful, and the expat community there is enormous. The largest concentration of North American expats in the world, in fact, which sounds like it might make the place feel less like Mexico. But what I have found is that it actually creates this extraordinary hybrid culture. People who have gone deep into Mexican life, who speak Spanish fluently, who have Mexican friends and spouses and business partners, and who can help newcomers navigate the complexity of the culture. San Miguel de Allende is another name you will hear constantly, and yes, it is more expensive than it used to be, but it is still dramatically cheaper than comparable quality of life in the United States or Canada, and it is one of the most beautiful colonial cities in the Americas. The art scene there is world-class. There are galleries, theater performances, cooking schools, language schools, dance classes, film screenings, festivals. The social calendar for a single person who wants to be engaged and connected is essentially unlimited. Oaxaca in the south is for those who want depth, one of the most culturally and culinarily rich regions of Mexico, with indigenous traditions that are still vibrantly alive, remarkable food, extraordinary markets, and an art scene that has been drawing painters and writers and filmmakers for generations. Less physically accessible than some cities, more demanding culturally, but enormously rewarding. For costs, a single person in these destinations typically lives well on $1,000 to $1,400 per month. Mexico has a temporary resident visa that is specifically designed for retirees. It requires proof of income, the thresholds are not high, and once approved, it offers enormous stability. Healthcare is excellent, particularly in larger cities, and at a fraction of the cost of comparable care in the United States. The food culture alone is worth the move. Mexican markets, fresh ingredients, the deep complexity of a cuisine that goes so far beyond what most Westerners understand. This is a place where cooking becomes an adventure. Country 5, Colombia. A few years ago, mentioning Colombia as a retirement destination would have gotten you a raised eyebrow. Today, it barely does. And that tells you something important about how dramatically this country has transformed. Colombia has done something extraordinary over the past 2 decades. It has invested in its cities, in its infrastructure, in its culture, and in convincing the world that the Colombia of the present is not the Colombia of the past. Medellin won an award for the world's most innovative city. Bogotá has one of the world's most extraordinary cycling cultures and a restaurant scene that has gone fully international. Cartagena on the Caribbean coast is one of the most beautiful cities in the hemisphere. And then there is the coffee region, La Zona Cafetera, which is simply one of the most gorgeous landscapes on the planet. For single retirees, Medellin has become the destination that people talk about the way they used to talk about Barcelona or Bangkok, as a place with an almost magnetic quality for a certain kind of adventurous, curious person. Medellin sits in a valley surrounded by mountains at an altitude that gives it what the locals call the eternal spring, temperatures between 20 and 28 degrees Celsius year-round, which is almost absurdly perfect. The city has excellent infrastructure, excellent food, strong healthcare options, and a social scene that for a single person can feel slightly overwhelming in the best possible way. The expat and digital nomad community in Medellin is enormous and active. There are regular social events, language exchanges, salsa classes, and if you want to meet Colombian people rather than just other expats, salsa dancing is genuinely the fastest route. Colombians are warm, demonstrative, social people who take enormous pride in their culture and who are generally delighted when foreigners make the effort to engage with it authentically. Colombia has a pensioner visa, the Visa de Pensionado, which requires proof of pension income at a relatively accessible threshold. Once you have it, you have legal stability and can access the healthcare system. Healthcare in Colombia is legitimately impressive. Medellin, in particular, has become a medical tourism destination, which means the quality is high and the costs are a fraction of what you would pay in North America. A single person can live comfortably in Medellin on $800 to $1,300 per month, depending on neighborhood and lifestyle. Bogotá is slightly more expensive, but also offers more in terms of cultural life: museums, theater, international dining, a literary culture that is deep and serious. The coffee region offers a slower pace, extraordinary natural beauty, and a warmth from locals that borders on the remarkable. The altitude adjustment takes some people a few weeks, and it is something to plan for. But most people find that once they are settled, they cannot imagine living anywhere else. Country 6, Thailand. We go back to Southeast Asia now, because no list of affordable retirement destinations is complete without Thailand, a country that has been perfecting the art of welcoming foreign retirees for decades and has gotten genuinely good at it. Thailand has a formal retirement visa, officially called the non-immigrant OA visa, designed specifically for people over 50 who want to stay long-term. It requires proof of a minimum level of funds in a Thai bank account, a clean criminal record, and health insurance. It is renewable and provides real stability. Thailand has essentially built a system around the idea of welcoming retirees, and you can feel that in how things work, or more accurately, how smoothly many things work once you understand the local rhythms. Chiang Mai in the north is the classic retirement city, and there is a reason the cliché exists. It is extraordinary, set in a valley surrounded by mountains and jungle, with a preserved historic old city full of temples, markets, and traditional craftsmanship, and a modern city around it with all the infrastructure you need. The cost of living is low even by Thai standards. A beautiful one-bedroom apartment can be found for $200 to $350 per month. Street food is some of the most delicious and varied in Asia, and eating at night markets or small restaurants can cost almost nothing. A comfortable single-person life in Chiang Mai, including a nice apartment, excellent food, yoga or fitness classes, scooter rental, activities, often comes to $700 to $900 per month. The expat community in Chiang Mai is one of the most developed and organized in the world. There are social groups for nearly every interest: hiking clubs, photography groups, Buddhist meditation retreats, cooking classes, book clubs, golf groups, volunteer networks. The city is large enough to have genuine variety, but small enough that you can build real friendships rather than constantly meeting strangers. Thai culture has a deep respect for older people, the concept of kreng jai, of consideration and care for others, shapes how Thais interact with everyone, but particularly with elders. You will encounter warmth and patience in daily interactions that can feel genuinely nourishing when you have been used to the often impersonal pace of Western urban life. Hua Hin on the Gulf of Thailand is worth mentioning for those who want beach life without the chaos of Phuket or Samui. It is a smaller city, beloved by Thai families and retirees alike, with a gentle pace and excellent infrastructure. Pattaya, while famous for other reasons, actually has one of the largest retirement communities in Asia and an enormous range of social activities once you look past the reputation. A note on health. Thailand's healthcare, particularly in Bangkok and Chiang Mai, is world-class and internationally accredited at a fraction of Western costs. This is not a minor point. For retirees, healthcare quality and affordability is often the deciding factor, and Thailand gets it right. Country 7, Ecuador, South America again, and this time a country that does not always make the first page of retirement guides, but absolutely should. Ecuador has 3 things that make it remarkable for retirees. First, it uses the US dollar as its official currency, which eliminates exchange rate anxiety entirely for North American retirees. Second, it sits on the equator, which sounds obvious given the name but has a real implication, which is that in the Andean highlands, where most expats settle, the altitude creates an eternal spring climate almost identical to what we described in Colombia. Third, Ecuador has a senior citizen card program, the Carnet de Discapacidad and the standard pensioner discounts, which gives legal residents over 65 discounts on nearly everything: public transport, utility bills, healthcare, restaurants, cultural events. The country has built legal preference for older residents into its infrastructure. Cuenca, in the southern highlands, has been called the best place to retire in the world by multiple international publications, and while rankings are always somewhat subjective, the reasons people give are consistent. It is a UNESCO World Heritage City, genuinely gorgeous colonial architecture, 4 rivers running through it, flower markets, churches on every corner. The climate is perfect year-round. The expat community is large, organized, and welcoming. Healthcare is excellent and extremely affordable. And the local population is warm, traditional, and genuinely hospitable. A single person can live very comfortably in Cuenca on $800 to $1,200 per month. This includes a furnished 1-bedroom apartment in a central neighborhood, perhaps $500, groceries, dining out regularly, activities, and some travel within the country. Ecuador is remarkably geographically diverse for such a small country. You can have breakfast in Cuenca in the mountains, be at the Pacific coast by afternoon, and visit the Amazon jungle on a weekend trip. The Galapagos Islands are expensive to visit but accessible. The country packs more natural variety per square kilometer than almost anywhere on Earth. Quito, the capital, is larger and more urban and sits at a very high altitude, about 2,800 meters, which is genuinely challenging for some people physiologically. But Cuenca at around 2,500 meters is easier for most, and smaller highland towns like Cotacachi in the north or Vilcabamba in the south, which has become famous as a valley of longevity, offer even gentler alternatives. Ecuador has an investment visa and a pensioner visa with accessible income thresholds. The country's infrastructure is decent. The food is hearty and good, if not as celebrated as Peru or Mexico, and the people are kind. For a single retiree who values natural beauty, genuine affordability, and a real community of both locals and expats, Ecuador is an underrated gem. Country 8, Albania. Now we go somewhere that will genuinely surprise most people on this list, and I love that it does, because Albania is one of the most fascinating, most beautiful, most misunderstood countries in Europe, and it is about to have a moment. Albania spent decades as one of the most isolated countries in the world under a deeply authoritarian communist government that ended in the early 1990s. That isolation left it dramatically underdeveloped compared to the rest of Europe. But in the 3 decades since, Albanians have rebuilt their country with an energy and determination that is genuinely moving to witness. And what they have rebuilt contains something that much of Europe lost long ago: authenticity. The Albanian coastline, the so-called Albanian Riviera, is jaw-droppingly beautiful. Turquoise water, dramatic mountains dropping into the sea, small villages with stone houses and fishing boats, almost entirely undiscovered by mass tourism. Compared to Croatia or Montenegro or Greece just across the Adriatic, prices are a fraction. A seafood dinner that would cost €40 in Dubrovnik costs €8 in Saranda. A beachfront apartment that would cost €2,000 a month in Split costs €300 in Albania. Inland, Tirana, the capital, has transformed into a genuinely vibrant city, colorful, chaotic, full of energy, with a cafe culture that rivals anything in Italy just across the water and a restaurant scene that has exploded in quality in the last 5 years. Berat and Gjirokastër are UNESCO heritage cities of extraordinary beauty, museum cities, the locals call them, where every building seems to have stood for centuries. For a single retiree, Albania offers something increasingly rare in the world, a place where you are still genuinely novel. Not in a fetishizing way, Albanians are too proud and too complex a people for that, but in the sense that if you show up with curiosity and respect, you will encounter a hospitality and a depth of connection that is almost shocking in its generosity. Albanians have a concept called besa, a pledge of honor, a word that once given is unbreakable, which in practice means that if an Albanian considers you a friend, they will do almost anything for you. This is not something you find in a guidebook. It is something you discover by showing up. Albania is not yet in the European Union, which means the visa situation is slightly more complex for some nationalities. But many Western passport holders can stay for up to 90 days without a visa, and long-term residence permits are obtainable. The healthcare system is still developing, which means international health insurance is strongly recommended. But costs overall are extraordinary. A single person can live very well in Albania on €600 to €900 per month. Albania is not for everyone. It requires a tolerance for imperfection, a sense of adventure, and a genuine interest in connecting with a culture rather than just transplanting your home life into cheaper surroundings. But for the right person, it offers something that money genuinely cannot buy in more established destinations. Country 9, Malaysia. Back to Asia and to a country that is doing something genuinely unusual in the retirement destination world. It is a Muslim-majority country with substantial Chinese, Indian, and indigenous communities, modern infrastructure, excellent healthcare, and costs that remain meaningfully below those of neighboring Singapore while offering much of the same quality of life. Malaysia has made a serious institutional effort to attract retirees through its Malaysia My Second Home program, which is one of the most comprehensive retirement visa programs in the world. It allows approved applicants to live in Malaysia long-term, bring a spouse, bring dependent children, import a personal car, work part-time in certain approved areas, and access a relatively stable legal framework. The income and deposit requirements have fluctuated over the years and are worth checking current figures, but the principle of the program, a country genuinely trying to make long-term residency workable for foreign retirees, is consistent. Kuala Lumpur is a genuinely modern, globally connected city, skyscrapers and jungle coexisting, food courts that are among the best in the world for variety and quality at almost laughably low prices, a middle class with international tastes and education, and a generally tolerant social culture. The food alone is reason enough. Malaysian cuisine is one of the great fusion traditions in the world, absorbing Chinese, Indian, Malay, and Nyonya influences into something entirely its own. Eating in Kuala Lumpur is not just sustenance, it is a daily adventure. Penang, the island state in the northwest, is where most retirees go, and it has been ranked among the world's top retirement destinations for years. Georgetown, its main city, is a UNESCO heritage city with extraordinary street art, a legendary food scene, a substantial and long-established expat community, and a slower pace than KL while retaining excellent infrastructure. Healthcare in Penang is exceptional. The island has become a medical tourism destination with hospitals that are internationally accredited and staffed by English-speaking doctors who often trained abroad. The Malaysian climate is tropical, hot and humid year-round with a rainy season, which suits some people perfectly and is challenging for others. English is widely spoken, which significantly reduces the language barrier. The country is majority Muslim, but alcohol is available, dress codes outside of mosques are relaxed, and daily life for most non-Muslim expats proceeds without friction. A single person can live comfortably in Penang on around $1,000 to $1,500 per month, which in Penang's context means a nice apartment, eating out frequently at excellent restaurants, gym membership, activities, and healthcare coverage. Country 10, Portugal's neighbor. Spain? No. Let us go deeper. North Macedonia. I can already hear some of you saying, where? And that is precisely the point. North Macedonia is a small landlocked country in the Balkans, bordered by Greece, Albania, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Kosovo. It is the kind of country that serious travelers sometimes discover accidentally, arriving on a bus heading somewhere else and deciding, a few days later, that they do not want to leave. It is the kind of place that has not yet been packaged and sold to the world, and that quality, that unpackaged authenticity, is becoming one of the rarest and most valuable things in travel. Skopje, the capital, is one of the most architecturally eccentric cities in Europe, the result of a somewhat controversial government project called Skopje 2014 that filled the city center with neoclassical statues and monuments on an almost comic scale. It is strange and maximalist, and completely unlike anywhere else. And once you get past the surrealism, you find underneath it a genuinely warm, lively, cafe-centric city with a population that is young, educated, and surprisingly globally connected. The Old Bazaar, the Çarşıcı, is a perfectly preserved Ottoman bazaar that has been functioning continuously for 500 years and where you can drink tea, watch craftsmen work, and feel time slow down in a way that genuinely heals something in the urban nervous system. Ohrid, 2 hours from Skopje on the shores of Lake Ohrid, is where people tend to fall permanently in love with North Macedonia. Lake Ohrid is one of the oldest and deepest lakes in Europe, so ancient that it contains species of fish and invertebrates found nowhere else on Earth. The town of Ohrid itself is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a medieval city of stone churches and Byzantine frescoes perched above the impossibly blue water. In summer, it is lively and festive. In autumn and spring, it is quiet and heartbreakingly beautiful. In winter, it is yours almost alone. For costs, North Macedonia is one of the cheapest countries in Europe for daily life. A comfortable one-bedroom apartment in Skopje costs around 200 to 300 euros per month. Groceries are cheap. Eating out is very affordable. A full meal with wine at a good restaurant might cost 10 euros. A single person can live genuinely well here on 500 to 700 euros per month. That is an almost shocking figure for a European capital. The expat community here is small but growing, and its smallness is part of its charm. You get to be among the people who discovered a place before everyone else did. Macedonians are extraordinarily hospitable. The Balkan tradition of hospitality is alive here in a way that has not been diluted by decades of mass tourism. People invite you to their tables. They want to know your story. They want to feed you. The language situation requires some effort. Macedonian uses the Cyrillic alphabet and is Slavic, so it is genuinely challenging for most Westerners. But English is spoken by most younger people, and the effort of learning even basic Macedonian phrases is met with such warmth and delight by locals that it becomes its own source of social connection. North Macedonia does not yet have a purpose-built retirement visa, but long-term residence permits are obtainable, and the country's EU accession process is advancing, which over time will likely formalize the situation further. Healthcare is adequate for routine care and improving. For anything serious, Skopje has good hospitals, and both Belgrade and Thessaloniki in neighboring countries are within a few hours. This is a place for the genuinely adventurous, For the retiree who does not want to simply find a cheaper version of home, but who wants to discover something entirely new and feel, perhaps for the first time in years, that they are actually living rather than simply existing. The bigger picture, what all 10 have in common. Let me step back for a moment, because after walking through 10 very different countries on 3 different continents, I want to talk about what connects them. What makes a place genuinely good for a single retiree, beyond the price tag? Every country on this list has something that I think of as social gravity, a cultural pull toward connection, toward community, toward the table. Whether it is the Georgian supra, the Vietnamese street stool, the Albanian besa, the Malaysian hawker center, or the Macedonian cafe. In each of these cultures, life is organized around shared experience in a way that Western individualism has largely dismantled. You do not have to build a social life in these places from scratch the way you might at home. The social life is already happening around you. You simply have to show up. What I also want to name directly is the reality of being single in retirement, because this is something that deserves honest conversation. Retirement amplifies everything. If you had a rich social life and strong community connections before retiring, retirement tends to make those things richer. If you were isolated or lonely, retirement can make that worse in ways that affect not just your happiness, but your health. The research on this is consistent and sobering. Chronic loneliness in older adults is associated with cognitive decline, cardiovascular disease, reduced immunity, and shortened lifespan. This is not a soft or sentimental point. It is a public health reality. Moving abroad does not automatically solve loneliness. Nothing automatically solves it, but it does something very specific and very powerful. It forces you into social engagement by making everything slightly unfamiliar. When you move to a new country, every task that was routine at home becomes a small adventure that requires interaction. You have to ask for help. You have to learn things. You have to make yourself understood. And in that process of necessary interaction, you meet people. You build familiarity with the woman at the bakery and the man who fixes bikes and the couple at your language class. These small, repeated interactions accumulate into something that starts to feel like belonging. And beyond the practical social scaffolding, there is the question of romantic possibility, which I know some of you are thinking about and perhaps feel shy to mention. Being single in retirement is not a problem to be solved, but if you want companionship, if you are open to love, moving abroad can genuinely reset possibilities in ways that staying in your hometown cannot. Different cultures have different relationships with age, with partnership, with what constitutes an attractive and interesting person. In many of the countries on this list, being a foreigner of a certain age who has traveled, who has stories, who has the wisdom that comes from having lived fully, that is genuinely appealing. You carry a different kind of currency. I have met people who moved abroad after divorce or widowhood, fully convinced that that chapter of their life was closed, and who found, a year or two into their new life, that it was not closed at all. That the combination of a new context, a rebuilt sense of self-confidence, and a social environment that did not categorize them by their past had opened something they thought was permanently shut. I am not promising that moving to Tbilisi or Medellin will deliver you a love story, but I am telling you that I have watched it happen more times than I can count, and that the countries on this list, places where warmth and community and human connection are cultural values rather than optional extras, are the right kind of environment for that kind of opening. Practical things to know before you go. I want to spend a few minutes on the practical side, because this channel is about giving you real information, not just beautiful pictures and inspiring stories. Before you choose a destination, there are 5 things you need to research specific to that country, and I would be failing you if I sent you off with a list of beautiful places without naming them. The first is the visa and residency situation. Every country on this list has a different pathway to legal long-term residence, and some are much simpler than others. Portugal, Malaysia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Thailand all have formal retirement or pensioner visa programs. Georgia and Albania have generous long-stay visa policies. North Macedonia requires more research and currently more flexibility. Before you commit, spend time with an immigration lawyer or a reputable expat forum specific to that country. Do not rely solely on blog posts from 2 years ago. This information changes. The second is healthcare. Every country on this list has healthcare available, but the quality, accessibility, and cost vary significantly. For most of the destinations on this list, I would strongly recommend international health insurance as a baseline, ideally one that includes evacuation coverage. In Thailand, Malaysia, and Colombia, local private healthcare is genuinely excellent, and you may find that local insurance is sufficient. In Albania and North Macedonia, international coverage with the ability to travel to a neighboring country for serious treatment is wise. The third is finances and banking. Moving your money internationally, managing accounts across currencies, receiving pension payments. This requires planning. Research whether your home country pension can be paid to a foreign bank account. Look into international bank accounts, currency transfer services, and what your home country's tax obligations are when you live abroad. Some countries have tax treaties that work in your favor, others do not. This is another area where professional advice is worth paying for once. The fourth is the language reality. You do not need to speak the local language fluently before you move. You genuinely do not. But you should make a plan for it. The expat communities in all 10 of these countries will allow you to function entirely in English if you choose to. But the depth of connection available to you, the relationships you can build with local people, the degree to which you can truly belong rather than merely reside, all of that is directly correlated with your willingness to engage with the language. Even modest effort is rewarded enormously. Download an app, take a class, go slowly, but go. The fifth is community research. Before you move to any of these places, find the active expat communities online and spend time with them. Facebook groups, Reddit forums, dedicated expat websites, these are where the real, unfiltered information lives. What has changed recently in visa policy? Which neighborhoods are safe and which to avoid? What are the current apartment prices? Which local doctors speak English? These communities are generally generous with information, and they are your best resource for what life actually looks like on the ground, as opposed to what it looks like in a promotional video. Conclusion. We have covered a lot of ground today. 10 countries, 3 continents, an enormous range of cultures and climates and costs and possibilities. But the single most important thing I want to leave you with is not practical. It is philosophical. Retirement is a portal. It is one of the few times in life when the architecture of your daily existence is genuinely open to redesign. When the job, the school schedule, the mortgage, the proximity to family obligations that have organized your geography for decades no longer do. That openness can be disorienting, or it can be the most liberating thing that ever happened to you. The retirees I have met who are most alive, who have the brightest eyes and the best stories and the most genuine joy, are almost universally people who treated that portal as an invitation rather than a cliff edge, who said yes to the unfamiliar, who chose places not just for their affordability, but for their warmth, their depth, their invitation to connect. Being single does not mean being alone. It means being free to design your life entirely around what actually brings you joy. And that, my friends, is not a consolation. That is a gift. I hope something in today's video sparked something for you. Whether you are 5 years away from retirement or 5 weeks, whether you have a clear picture of where you want to go or no idea at all, I want you to know that the world is larger and more welcoming than the narratives we absorbed in the working years suggested. There is a version of your future out there that is richer and more connected and more surprising than you have allowed yourself to imagine. Go find it. I will be right here, helping you plan. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave me a comment below telling me which of these 10 countries made your heart skip a beat. I read every single one. And if you have already made the leap and are living abroad in retirement, I especially want to hear from you. See you in the next video.